David Brewster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is part 2 of Songwriting Secrets, linear progressions. And I have had already some feedback and interest in part 1 from this series, so I thought I'd go ahead and knock out, part 2. And I will, kind of continue to add more installments of this particular series over the next few months or so. And I do have a lot of ideas, to kind of showcase and kind of flesh out. But then we are going to return to just regular, chord play episodes too, where I've got some, bands and guitarists and some different ideas I'm going to put together too. So we're going to, mix it up. It's not just going to be, this, but I did want to follow part 1 with part 2 just to give, those that are watching this series a little bit more they can play around with and kind of chew on. But as far as songwriting though, and putting, chords together and adding a rhythm, maybe you've got a melody or some lyric ideas or something like that, it's actually a lot easier than what a lot of people think. I'm talking about basic songwriting, like a blues tune or, a rock song or country song or folk tune or something like that. It's generally, a handful of chords, a melody, maybe a catchy rhythm, and you're off and running. Now, if you're writing a prog rock song or, some crazy metal tune or some fusion or maybe a modern, classical symphony or something like that, then obviously that's going to be more detailed. There's going to be a lot more work involved, and it's a lot harder, when you're going beyond just the basics. But since we're kind of tapping into some of these basics, and I've been throwing out, some alternatives and some different things you can try, it is good to really kind of get your footing and figure out, okay, this is where it starts, and then you can start building from there. And you can make this very complicated, but I'm going to try to keep it pretty simple so just about anybody watching this can understand. All right, to kick things off, we're actually going to start or begin where we left things in the previous episode in part 1. So at the end of part 1, we were talking about, 4-chord progressions, and I introduced the 1-6-4-5 progression in A major. And once again, that was A major, F sharp minor, D major, and E major. And I mentioned Stand By Me and Runaway and some of those old songs. So if I mention, older music, from the 50s or the 60s, or maybe I'm going back to like the 20s or 30s or something like that, there's a reason. I'm not throwing out all this older music to, confuse or lose somebody. I'm literally giving you kind of the foundation, or, tracing things back to the origin of where you might hear it in rock or blues or country or whatever. And granted, we can find 1-6-4-5 progressions in classical music, written hundreds of years ago. But I'm not going to go back that far. I mean, we can, but I'm trying to keep things at least, somewhat recent, like the 50s or the 60s, which really that was a long time ago, but we can still learn from those songs and some of those early habits, because you can still hear this today in modern music, whether it's played on guitar or keyboard or whatever it's played on. But, just to kick things off again, 1-6-4-5 in the key of A major, that's A major, F sharp minor, D major, and E major. And there's a gazillion ways you could arrange, that 4-chord progression on the guitar. And you could use bar chords like that. And you kind of move around the neck. Or you can also kind of map out and find chords that kind of live in a single position. We could use this for A. And then there's F sharp minor right there. And then D major. And then E major. And I'm kind of finding it, in a general location, so I don't have to move around quite so much. Really good to do that and kind of, figure out different ways of playing the same progression. Bar chords and partial chords. If you're a, reggae or a ska fan, you could actually translate that and just turn it into little triads. And I mentioned Stand By Me and Runaway and some of those older songs, but you can hear that, Crocodile Rock and Giant Maker, from Led Zeppelin, Crocodile Rock, of course, from Elton John. You can find that in tons of songs and tons of music. And it may not be strummed bar chords. It might be like the reggae approach. It could be just power chords. And you can kind of dumb those chords down to just simple 5 chords, and it would still work. That kind of thing or whatever. Crank up your overdrive and distortion, and you can start rocking out with that progression. But what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about diatonic substitutions. And I introduced this a little bit in part 1, but we're going to go a little bit deeper here. So once again, that's a 1, 6, 4, 5. In the key of A major, F sharp minor, D major, E major. The first variation we're going to create here is nicknamed the Doo-Wop progression. And obviously Doo-Wop is an older form of music from the 50s, very popular then. And then it slowly kind of dissipated, of course, by the 60s, the flower power and kind of the folk and the rock movement, kind of helped disappear, Doo-Wop kind of disappeared from the scene. And that happens, you can go back and you can find, early forms of music, bebop and Dixieland jazz, and, there's all these different forms of music that at one time were very popular, and then they just kind of vanished. And there's a small pocket of musicians that kind of keep some of those rare forms of music and subgenres and things like that. They kind of keep it alive. But the doo-wop variation, what we're going to do is we're going to keep basically the frame of that progression: A major, F sharp minor, D major, and E major. But instead of playing D major, we're going to substitute and play B minor, which would be the 2 chord in A major. So one more time, just to refresh your ear, here's the 1, 6, 4, 5. And all we're going to do is we're going to replace that 4 chord. We're not going to play, D major. We're going to play B minor, which would be the 2 in A major. Twist, compared to the 1, 6, 4, 5. It's a little different. And you can play that anywhere. Once again, you could turn it into a reggae tune. There's a ton of ways you can play that on guitar, but that gives it a very, signature, kind of different sound. But there are a lot of classic songs and famous songs that use that progression. Blue Moon and some of the old doo-wop stuff. Since it's named, the doo-wop progression, you can definitely go back in the 50s and you'll find tons of songs either using a 1, 6, 4, 5 or a 1, 6, 2, 5, because it's very common. I mentioned Blue Moon. You're Gonna Lose That Girl by the Beatles, Bruce Springsteen, Hungry Heart. There's a whole bunch of songs that use that same progression. Now, the tempo and the rhythm might be a little bit different, and maybe it's in a different key, but you'll definitely find, 1, 6, 2, 5 progressions everywhere. Up next, we're gonna talk about the Sleepwalk Switch. Now, Sleepwalk, of course, is a classic instrumental from the 50s, Santo and Johnny. You've probably heard, like TV shows and movies and things like that. It's a very famous song. I think Satriani even covered this song. I'm not sure, I can't remember which album that was on, but I'm pretty sure he did a version of this. But this is interesting, and this is going to be a non-diatonic substitution. So we just talked briefly about a diatonic substitution, where we took the 1, 6, 4, 5, and then we changed the 4 to the 2 chord, and that's diatonic because that 2 chord B minor, lives in the key of A major, and that's the 2 of A major. But what we're going to do now is we're going to, basically borrow this chord progression idea from Sleepwalk, and it's nicknamed the Sleepwalk Switch. And what we're going to do now is we're going to, play the 1 chord, A major, F sharp minor for that 6th chord, and then we're going to play D minor for the 4 chord. So we're actually borrowing from the parallel minor. Normally that was D major, right? we're going to play D minor and then E major. So it's a 1, 6, 4, 5, but it has a minor 4-chord like this. You can play that. You know, you can do it higher, kind of based around a single position like I was doing earlier. You could do the reggae version. You could do, you know, several different things with that just to variate it and try it in different ways. Now, Sleepwalk itself is actually in the key of C. So if we translated that back to the original key that Sleepwalk is in, that would be C major, A minor, F minor, G. You know, very familiar sound, very popular sound. And there's a lot of songs other than Sleepwalk that use that progression. But most people, when they think of that, that's what they think of. You know, it's a very popular song, very famous song. Even in today's world, you know, you can hear that either on the radio or on television and movies and commercials and things like that. You know, very popular. All right, now we're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to talk about linear progressions. Now, I know this sounds complicated, but it's really not that hard. And the first thing I want you to do is we're going to focus on just the root note. And you can kind of almost think this like the bass line or the bass notes. But we're going to basically focus on descending linear progressions for this. Now we can reverse that and do ascending. And when you do ascending linear progressions, it has a very uplifting sound. It feels like you're going up, you know, or you're rising. And then when you hear the descending linear progressions, obviously it feels like you're going down or you're sinking or floating, you know, downward. And the first thing I want you to think of, though, is the bass line, like this. All right, there I just played A, G, F, and E. And we're going to look at this in the key of A minor. So if I define, you know, chords based around those bass notes, you know, A minor, G major, F major, and then we're going to end with E7. So I started with, you know, A minor, that's the 1 chord, and then we're doing a flat 7 there, which is that G major chord, and then a flat 6, which is that F chord, and then we're playing a major 5 chord, so we're kind of ending with this little twist. And if you've been kind of paying attention to some of the lessons, obviously the harmonic minor mastery and some of those lessons, you know, when you change the 5 chord in a minor key to a dominant 7 or a major chord, it implies harmonic minor. So right there, that progression is flirting with harmonic minor. Now, your ear is probably recognizing that sound because you can hear this in tons and tons of songs. The Ventures, you know, Walk Don't Run, Runaway by Del Shannon. Mediterranean Sundance by Al Di Meola. I mean, even the outro of Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. You know, they kind of bypass the E, but, you know, it's basically using the same idea. Now, you can find this everywhere. There are tons and tons of examples of this. Now, that's in the key of A minor, of course. You know, we had A minor, G, F, and E7. But think of like Brian Setzer and the Stray Cats strut. You know, same progression, just in a different key. Sultans of Swing, Dire Straits, you know, it's the same idea, but now in D minor. C major, B flat major, and A major, or A7. Very famous example. Dire Straits are awesome. Mark Knopfler's, a genius. But that's a very famous song too. And you can find those types of progressions everywhere. So you can see we're moving in a linear fashion, along one string or a single string as far as the bass note. And then we're filling that out with chords, and we're moving, in a descending way. So it's giving it that kind of feeling like we're going down, like we're walking down a flight of stairs, or we're coming down the mountain or whatever, because we're hearing it descend. Now, if you reverse that, of course, it's going to have more of an uplifting sound because you're going to be going up. Right? So you can go either way. You can go up or down. Maybe you want to end on that A minor chord, and then you want to walk up to it. That's pretty typical and very common too. There are a lot of examples of these linear progressions like that, and we could definitely hit major keys, but before we leave, minor, and I'm definitely a big minor key fan, we're going to look at another one. This one's very popular. So this one's going to be a slight alteration on what we were looking at, because a second ago, we had the root, we had the flat 7, the flat 6, and the 5. And now what we're going to target is the root, the flat 7, the 6, and then the flat 6. And just the bass line, would be this. Right? A, G, F sharp, F. Now a really famous example of this is While My Guitar Gently Weeps by the Beatles. Right? You got the A minor over G, and the D over F sharp. F chord. Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You by Led Zeppelin uses almost the same progression. And Zeppelin even went into the E major chord too, so they were kind of still, using the previous linear progression, and they added the E at the end. So that's a very interesting chord progression, and there's a lot of different ways you can play that on the guitar. And if you want to think more, power chords or bar chords, think of 25 or 6/4 by Chicago, and you'll hear that same progression. A5, G5, F sharp 5, F5, and they also hit the E to G, and they start the whole thing over again. So there are a ton of variations of this that we can target and we can talk about. The last example here is actually a more recent, guitar song, and this is a Satriani tune, and this is from his Crystal Planet album, and this is Lights of Heaven. And in the song, near kind of, about the halfway point or closer to the end of the tune, you'll hear an extended linear progression. Now, Joe Satriani, honestly, is a great guitarist to study and notice, because if you go back and you start looking at some of the rhythm parts to his songs, go back and listen to Surfing with the Alien, and some of those albums, Playing the Blue Dream and The Extremist, and some of those albums, and really pay attention to his rhythm parts. Now, I know his guitar solos and the shredding and everything is a major distraction, but ignore the soloing, which I know that's hard to do, but ignore his soloing and focus on just the rhythm parts. And if you start looking at the chord progressions, or if you really want to challenge your rhythm ability and your knowledge of, chord progressions and things like that, study Satriani, because you can tell he's gone back and studied, all these different things that we've talked about, and a whole bunch of things we haven't even mentioned yet. But his part writing, his rhythm parts, his chord progressions, the way he puts songs together, it's very intelligent. He puts a lot of thought into it. And anyway, from this song, it's actually in the key of E minor, and he's doing 2 sets of linear progressions. So the first one, it's E minor, D major to C, and then A minor, G to F. So he's actually borrowing part of the one we already looked at, and then he's introduced this other one. But when you put that together, very interesting sound. And also it's cool because he's expanded, and made this huge progression, with 6 chords. And it has a really cool sound to it. And of course, I'm playing full bar chords, you know, and I believe Joe's just kind of playing power chords during that, and some partial chords, you know, in the mix. But that's a great example of, you know, a more modern version of, you know, where you can find this in action. And there's, you know, a gazillion songs that use these progressions. So you'll notice, you know, when you're playing 1-4-5s and some of these other progressions that we've looked at, your hand might be in a little box, you know, formation where you're just kind of in one, you know, area or neighborhood on the fretboard. But then when you start exploring these linear progressions, you'll notice you're going to start moving around the fretboard more and grabbing, you know, additional chords and kind of shifting, which is pretty cool. That's going to wrap part 2 in the series, Songwriting Secrets, Linear Progressions, and I'm definitely have some more things on deck or in store for this series. I am going to return to a normal, you know, Chordplay format or, you know, episode or whatever after this, but I am going to return and occasionally, you know, kind of add another, you know, lesson to this series. So leave some feedback and some comments, you know, let me know, you know, if you'd like kind of mapping out, you know, some of these progressions. And definitely we can make the big connection. You know, we can talk about progressions and chords and, you know, songwriting, but then we can also relate this back to scales. And that's where you start finding your melodies and solos and things like that. And of course we can also relate this to arpeggios too. And then once you start doing that, then you're literally, you know, flirting with, you know, some awesome material, because once you understand, you know, the basics and the foundation, and then you start exploring scales and arpeggios on top of that, you'll be unstoppable. So we're going to get there. It's just going to take a little bit of time for me to kind of, you know, kind of pump these videos out. But leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it, more content material. Thank you.